The bread was still warm when Serena Moraga pressed it into the trembling hands of the old man, sitting alone by the bridge. She had no idea that this simple act of kindness would soon connect her to one of the wealthiest families in America. Abraham Fenwick looked up at her with eyes that held decades of pain. His threadbare suit hung loose on his frail frame, and his shoes were so worn she could see his socks through the holes. But there was something about his posture, a quiet dignity that made her heart ache. "Good morning," Serena said softly, her breath visible in the crisp autumn air. "You look like someone could use something to eat." The old man shook his head, pride warring with a hunger gnawing at his stomach. But something in Serena's gentle brown eyes, something without judgment or pity, made him reach out slowly and accept the offering. "Thank you," he whispered, his voice barely audible over the sound of the river flowing beneath them. "Hi viewers, kindly tell us where you're watching from and what time it is. Warm welcome to the family. Enjoy the story." Serena reached into her wicker basket and pulled out a fresh egg, still warm from her small hen house. "For strength," she said, placing it carefully in his weathered palm. The simple gesture sent a jolt through Abraham's chest. When was the last time someone had shown him such uncomplicated kindness? She didn't know that the man before her was the father of Lysander Fenwick, whose name appeared on billboards across 3 states. She didn't know that this broken-down figure in tattered clothes had once lived in a mansion with 12 bedrooms. All she saw was someone who needed help. "I'm Serena," she said, adjusting the worn cotton shawl around her shoulders. "I pass by here most mornings on my way to the market." "Abraham," he replied, his voice gaining slightly more strength. He studied her face, the way her dark hair escaped from its simple braid, the calluses on her hands that spoke of hard work, the genuine warmth in her smile that reached her eyes. Behind her, a small girl with pigtails peered around Serena's skirt. This was Leora, her 7-year-old daughter, who had inherited her mother's curious nature and kind heart. "Hello," Leora whispered shyly, waving at Abraham with tiny fingers. For the first time in months, Abraham felt the corners of his mouth lift into something resembling a smile. "Hello, little one." Serena had risen before dawn, as she did every day. Her small cottage at the edge of Willow Creek might have patched walls and a sagging roof, but it was filled with love and the smell of fresh herbs drying by the single window. She had milked her goat, gathered eggs from her 3 hens, and packed her basket with the few vegetables she could spare from her garden. The market wouldn't open for another hour, but Serena always took this route by the river. Something about the sound of moving water calmed her mind and prepared her for whatever challenges the day might bring. As a widow trying to raise a daughter alone, those challenges were numerous. But today was different. Today, she had found Abraham. "Are you from around here?" she asked gently, not wanting to pry, but sensing he needed someone to talk to. Abraham nodded slowly. "I used to be. Haven't been back well, it's been a long time." His eyes drifted to the water, remembering evenings spent fishing in this very spot with his son, back when Lysander was just a boy with gapped teeth and scraped knees. That son now lived in a penthouse apartment 3 hours away, running an empire worth billions. Abraham had seen his picture in newspapers, sharply dressed, surrounded by important people, shaking hands with politicians and celebrities. But Lysander might as well have lived on the moon for all the contact they had. "Well," Serena said, standing and brushing crumbs from her simple dress, "I should get going." But she hesitated, then made a decision that would change everything. "I'll be by tomorrow morning, too, if you'd like some company." Abraham's throat tightened with emotion. "I like that very much." As Serena and Leora walked away toward the bustling market square, Abraham watched until they disappeared around a bend. He looked down at the bread and egg in his hands, simple gifts that felt more precious than gold. What he didn't know was that his son Lysander was, at that very moment, sitting in a boardroom 200 miles away, staring out the window and wondering if his father was still alive. Guilt ate at him daily, but pride and fear kept him from picking up the phone. And what Serena didn't know was that her act of kindness had just set in motion a chain of events that would bring together 3 lonely hearts in ways none of them could imagine. Have you ever helped someone not knowing the full story? Let me know in the comments. This one's just beginning. Don't forget to subscribe for more heartfelt stories like this. She didn't know it yet, but that simple offering would change everything. Abraham was already sitting on the bench when Serena arrived the next morning, clutching a thermos of hot tea and a small bundle wrapped in cloth. The sight of him waiting there, shoulders straight despite the cold, made something flutter in her chest. "I wasn't sure you'd come back," he said quietly as she approached, his breath forming small clouds in the chilly air. Serena smiled, unwrapping the bundle to reveal thick slices of homemade bread spread with butter and honey. "I always keep my promises." As Abraham accepted the warm tea, their fingers brushed for just a moment. The touch sent an unexpected warmth through Serena's hand, a feeling she hadn't experienced since her husband died 3 years ago. "Tell me about your family," Serena said, settling beside him on the weathered wooden bench. She had learned that lonely people often just needed someone to listen. Abraham's eyes grew distant, staring across the river toward the hills. "I had a wife once, Margaret. She could make anyone laugh with just a look." His voice softened with the memory. "We had one son, bright boy, always asking questions, always building things with his hands." "What happened to them?" Serena asked gently, though she could see the pain written across his weathered face. "Margaret died when our boy was 12. Cancer took her slowly, then all at once." Abraham's hands trembled slightly as he lifted the tea to his lips. "After that, I couldn't give him what he needed. Sent him away to school, then college, then he built his own life. Haven't seen him in—" He paused, counting years that felt like decades. 7 years now. Serena felt tears prick her eyes. She understood loss, the way it could swallow a person whole if they let it. "What's his name?" "Lysander." Abraham's voice carried both pride and regret. "Named after his grandfather. He's done well for himself. Very well. Sometimes I see his name in newspapers or magazines." He laughed bitterly. "My son, the stranger." Behind them, Leora played by the water's edge, collecting smooth stones and humming softly to herself. Serena watched her daughter and felt a fierce protectiveness rise in her chest. She couldn't imagine being separated from Leora, not for any reason. "You could write to him," she suggested carefully. "Or call." Abraham shook his head. "What would I say? That I'm sorry for being a coward? That I let grief turn me into someone he couldn't recognize?" He gestured to his worn clothes, his empty pockets. "Look at me, Serena. What father would be proud to claim me now? Any father who truly knew you," she said firmly. The conviction in her voice surprised them both. As the days passed, their morning meetings became routine. Serena would bring food, sometimes soup in a small pot, sometimes fresh fruit from her garden, always something made with care. Abraham would share stories of his past, carefully avoiding details that might reveal too much about his son's success. He told her about the house where Lysander grew up, though he described it as smaller than it really was. He spoke of fishing trips and bedtime stories, of a boy who dreamed of building bridges and towers that reached the sky. What he didn't mention was that those childhood dreams had become reality. That Lysander now owned construction companies across 5 states. "You're a good listener," Abraham said one morning after sharing a particularly painful memory about Margaret's final days. Serena blushed, tucking a strand of dark hair behind her ear. "My mother always said God gave us 2 ears and 1 mouth for a reason. Your mother sounds like she was a wise woman." "She was. Lost her when I was 16. Serena's voice grew quiet. "Sometimes I wonder what she'd think of the choices I've made." Abraham studied her profile, the determined set of her jaw, the gentle curve of her smile, the way she always made sure Leora was safe and happy. "She'd be proud," he said with certainty that surprised even himself. The warmth in his voice made Serena's heart skip. She looked at him, really looked, and saw past the worn clothes and tired eyes to the man underneath. There was strength there, and kindness, and something that made her feel less alone in the world. Would you keep visiting a stranger like Serena did? Share your thoughts, and please hit the like button if this story is touching your heart. What neither of them knew was that every morning when Serena left, Abraham would carefully fold the napkins she'd given him and place them in a small wooden box beside his bed. He'd started looking forward to her visits with an anticipation that both thrilled and terrified him. And what Abraham couldn't have known was that Serena had begun taking extra care with her appearance on these morning walks, braiding her hair more carefully, wearing her one good dress instead of her work clothes, humming as she prepared his food. Serena didn't realize Abraham had begun saving every napkin she gave him, every one of her smiles. The photograph was yellowed at the edges when Abraham pulled it from his coat pocket, handling it like something precious and fragile. Margaret's face smiled back at him from across the years, young, radiant, full of dreams they'd planned to chase together. She was beautiful, Serena said softly, sitting closer to him on the bench than she had before. The morning mist rose from the river like ghosts of memory. Beautiful and stubborn. Abraham's thumb traced the edge of the photo. When I told her I wanted to marry her, she said I had to prove I could make her laugh every day for a month straight. And did you? Made it 32 days, just to be sure. For the first time in years, Abraham's laugh was genuine, reaching his eyes and transforming his whole face. She said yes on day 33, but she made me wait another week just to keep me humble. Serena found herself smiling at the image of young Abraham desperately trying to win his bride. What kind of jokes did you tell? Terrible ones. Really terrible. Abraham shook his head at the memory. But she laughed anyway because she was kind, just like you. The comparison made Serena's cheeks flush pink. She looked down at her hands, suddenly aware of how close they were sitting, how Abraham's knee almost touched hers. After Margaret died, Abraham continued, his voice growing heavy. I didn't know how to be a father anymore. Lysander was just a boy, barely 12, and suddenly he was looking to me for everything. Meals, homework, comfort when he had nightmares about losing me too. Abraham stared across the water, lost in painful memories. I failed him, completely. I was so buried in my own grief that I couldn't see his. When he'd ask about his mother, I'd change the subject. When he needed help with school, I'd hire tutors instead of sitting down with him myself. You were grieving too, Serena said gently. People handle loss differently. That's no excuse. Abraham's hands clenched into fists. I should have been stronger. Should have held us together instead of letting everything fall apart. By the time Lysander turned 16, we barely spoke. I sent him to boarding school, told myself it was for his own good. The pain in his voice made Serena's heart ache. She had lost her husband suddenly in a work accident, but she'd had Leora to focus on, a reason to keep going. She couldn't imagine facing that darkness alone. Where is he now? She asked. Abraham was quiet for so long she thought he wouldn't answer. Finally, he said he built something amazing with his life, something I could never have given him. He's successful beyond anything I ever dreamed of when I was his age. There was pride in his voice, but also a deep sadness that made Serena want to reach out and comfort him. Instead, she asked, have you tried to contact him? What would I say? Hello, son, I know I abandoned you when you needed me most, but I'd like to have coffee. Abraham shook his head bitterly. He's better off without me. You don't know that. Ido. Trust me, Serena. Some bridges can't be rebuilt once they've burned down. Later that afternoon, Serena found herself thinking about Abraham as she tended her small garden behind the cottage. She pulled weeds from between the carrot rows with more force than necessary, frustrated by his stubborn refusal to see his own worth. Mama, you're frowning. Leora observed from where she sat cross-legged in the dirt, playing with a collection of smooth river stones. Am I? Serena touched her face, surprised to find tension in her jaw. Are you thinking about the sad man by the river? Serena paused in her weeding. What makes you think he's sad? His eyes, Leora said simply. They look like yours did after Papa went to heaven. But they get happier when you bring him food. The innocence of her daughter's observation hit Serena like a physical blow. She sat back on her heels, dirt-stained hands resting on her knees. Do you like him, sweetheart? Leora nodded earnestly. He talks to me like I'm a real person, not just a little kid. And he makes you smile more. That evening, Serena walked to the general store to trade eggs for flour. Mrs. Henderson, the shop owner, was a kind woman with a talent for gentle gossip. "I hear you've been visiting with old Abraham Fenwick," Mrs. Henderson said as she counted out Serena's eggs. Serena's hands stilled on the flour sack. "Fenwick? Oh yes, been around these parts for years. Used to live in that big house up on Maple Hill before it got sold. Terrible thing. What happened to his family?" Mrs. Henderson shook her head sadly. "Lost his wife to illness. Then his boy went off to make something of himself in the big city. Haven't seen hide nor hair of the son in years." Serena's mind raced. Abraham had never mentioned his last name, had never told her where he used to live. What happened to the house? Sold a few years back. Heard Abraham couldn't keep up with the payments after his wife's medical bills piled up. He's been living in that tiny place by the railroad tracks ever since. Mrs. Henderson leaned closer conspiratorially. "Some say his son sends money, but Abraham's too proud to take it." Walking home in the gathering dusk, Serena felt a new understanding settle over her like a heavy blanket. Abraham hadn't just lost his wife and son. He lost his home, his financial security, everything that had once defined his life. No wonder he felt unworthy of reconnecting with Lysander. But something Mrs. Henderson had said nagged at her. If Lysander was sending money that Abraham refused to take, maybe the son wasn't as indifferent as Abraham believed. Maybe there were two broken hearts in this story, both too proud and afraid to reach out. That night, Abraham opened a sealed envelope. It bore his son's name. The letter trembled in Abraham's weathered hands as he read it by the light of a single candle. Lysander's handwriting, once the careful script of a schoolboy, now the confident strokes of a man, filled the expensive paper with words that cut deeper than any blade. "Dear Dad, I hope this finds you well. I know it's been too long since we've spoken, and I take full responsibility for that. I've been thinking about Mom lately, especially around her birthday. Do you still visit her grave? I wanted to come, but I wasn't sure you'd want to see me." Abraham's eyes blurred as he continued reading. "I've built a successful business. Maybe you've heard. Sometimes I catch myself wondering what you'd think of what I've accomplished. Would you be proud? Would Mom? I hope so, because everything I've done has been trying to honor the lessons you both taught me before everything fell apart." The candle flickered, casting dancing shadows across Abraham's small room. He lived now in a tiny apartment above the old bakery, with walls so thin he could hear his neighbor's television through the plaster. Such a far cry from the spacious house where he and Margaret had raised their son. "I've enclosed something that I hope you'll accept. It's not charity. It's a son trying to take care of his father the way I should have years ago. Please don't be too proud to let me help. I have more than I need, and knowing you're comfortable would mean everything to me." Abraham looked at the check that had fallen from the envelope. The amount made his hands shake harder. More money than he'd seen in 5 years, written in his son's careful handwriting and signed with love. But instead of cashing it, Abraham folded the check and placed it in the wooden box beside his bed. The same box where he kept Serena's napkins and small mementos from their morning meetings. He'd never cashed any of Lysander's previous checks either. Pride was a stubborn thing, even when it made no practical sense. The next morning, Serena noticed immediately that something had changed. Abraham's usually neat appearance was disheveled, his eyes red-rimmed with exhaustion. "You didn't sleep," she observed, settling beside him with a thermos of hot coffee and freshly baked biscuits. "Not much, no." Abraham accepted the coffee gratefully, letting the warmth seep through his fingers. "Want to talk about it?" Abraham was quiet for a long moment, watching Leora chase butterflies along the riverbank. Finally, he said, "Do you think a man can wait too long to fix his mistakes?" Serena studied his profile, noting the way his jaw worked with unspoken emotion. "I think it's never too late to try. Even if you've hurt someone so badly, they might not want to hear from you. Especially then." Serena's voice was firm. "The people we love deserve to know we're sorry, even if they can't forgive us right away." Abraham reached into his coat pocket and pulled out the letter, handling it carefully. "My son wrote to me." Serena's heart jumped. "That's wonderful. What did he say?" "That he misses his mother, that he wonders if I'm proud of him." Abraham's voice cracked slightly. that he wants to take care of me. And what did you write back? Abraham looked at her with eyes full of pain. Nothing. I haven't written back. Why not? The question hung in the air between them. Abraham stared at the letter in his hands, then at Serena's gentle face, then back at the water flowing endlessly toward the sea. Because I'm afraid, he finally admitted. Afraid that if I reach out, he'll realize I'm not the father he remembers. Afraid that if we meet again, he'll see how far I've fallen and regret ever writing to me. Serena felt a surge of frustration mixed with tenderness. Abraham, listen to me. Your son doesn't care about your clothes or where you live. He cares about you. The fact that he's still writing, still sending money you're too stubborn to take, proves he loves you. You don't understand. No, you don't understand. Serena's voice was stronger now, powered by conviction. I lost my husband in an instant. No goodbye, no last words, no chance to tell him all the things I should have said. You have a son who's reaching out to you, who wants a relationship, and you're throwing it away because of pride. Abraham flinched as if she'd slapped him. I'm sorry, Serena said immediately, her anger deflating. I didn't mean to. No, you're right. Abraham folded the letter carefully and put it back in his pocket. Margaret used to tell me the same thing. That pride was just fear wearing fancy clothes. They sat in silence for a while, watching the river flow past. Finally, Abraham said, He's very successful, my son. More successful than I ever was. Sometimes I see his name in the business section of newspapers. What kind of business? Construction. Development. He builds things, shopping centers, office buildings, entire neighborhoods. Abraham's voice carried a mix of pride and sadness. Just like he dreamed of as a boy. He wanted to build bridges then, said he'd make one so strong they'd last forever. Serena smiled at the image of young Lysander with his ambitious dreams. Sounds like he got that determination from his father. From his mother, more likely. She was the strong one. As they talked, neither noticed the expensive black car that had been parked across the bridge for the past hour, its driver using binoculars to watch their interaction. The car's owner had been making discreet inquiries around town, trying to piece together his father's new life. Lysander Fenwick sat in the back seat of his luxury sedan, watching his father share breakfast with a woman and child he'd never seen before. His private investigator had mentioned that Abraham seemed to have made friends in town, but seeing it with his own eyes stirred emotions he wasn't prepared for. The woman was beautiful in a simple, natural way. She had kind eyes and gentle movements, and she made his father smile. Something Lysander hadn't seen in years. The little girl playing nearby was clearly comfortable around Abraham, chatting with him like he was her grandfather. Sir, his driver asked quietly, should we approach? Lysander watched as the woman touched his father's hand briefly, a gesture of comfort that spoke of genuine affection. His father looked happier than Lysander could remember, but also frilier, older. The clothes he wore were clean, but obviously worn, patched in places where the fabric had given way. Not yet, Lysander said finally. He pulled out his phone and called his assistant. Cancel my meetings for the rest of the week. I'm staying in Willow Creek. That afternoon, mysterious packages began arriving at various addresses around town. Expensive cuts of meat delivered to the butcher shop with instructions to give them to anyone who might need them. New winter coats left anonymously at the church for distribution. A generous donation to the local school with a note requesting it go toward supplies for underprivileged children. Serena heard about the mysterious benefactor from Mrs. Henderson when she stopped by for supplies. Strangest thing, the shop owner said, shaking her head. Money's been showing up all over town. Anonymous donations, pay bills, gifts for folks who need them most. Some rich person's got a guilty conscience, I'd say. As Serena walked home, she couldn't shake the feeling that someone was watching her. She glanced over her shoulder several times, but saw nothing unusual, just the normal afternoon bustle of a small town going about its business. What she didn't see was the man in the expensive suit standing behind the newspaper rack outside the post office, studying her face with the intensity of someone trying to solve a puzzle. And then one letter arrived with a return address from Greenwood, addressed to Serena. Serena stared at the envelope in her hands, her heart pounding against her ribs like a trapped bird. The return address read simply L. Fenwick, Greenwood, written in the same confident handwriting she'd glimpsed on Abraham's letters. Her hands trembled as she turned the expensive paper over, noting the quality of the stationery. Thick, cream-colored, with edges that felt smooth as silk. How did Abraham's son know her name? How did he know where she lived? "Mama, what's wrong?" Leora asked from across their small kitchen, where she was carefully arranging wildflowers in a mason jar. "You look scared." Serena forced her expression into something calmer, though her mind raced with possibilities. "Nothing's wrong, sweetheart. Just unexpected mail." She waited until Leora was outside playing before opening the letter with shaking fingers. The message inside was brief, but written with careful consideration. "Dear Mrs. Moraga, I hope you'll forgive my reaching out to you directly. My name is Lysander Fenwick, and I believe you know my father, Abraham. I've been told of your kindness toward him, and I wanted to express my gratitude. If you would be willing to meet with me, I'd very much like to thank you in person. I'll be at the Riverside Cafe tomorrow at 2 p.m., hoping you might join me. Respectfully yours, Lysander Fenwick." Serena read the letter 3 times, each reading raising more questions than answers. How long had Lysander been watching? What did he want from her? And why did the formal politeness of his words feel like they were hiding something deeper? That evening, she found herself unable to concentrate on her usual tasks. She burned the cornbread she was baking for dinner, forgot to feed her goat until the animal's plaintive bleating reminded her, and nearly dropped a full basket of freshly folded laundry. "Tell me about Lysander," she said the next morning as she sat with Abraham by the river. She decided not to mention the letter yet. Something told her to hear Abraham's version of his son first. Abraham's face immediately brightened and darkened at the same time, pride and pain warring in his expression. "What do you want to know? What was he like as a boy?" Abraham smiled, the first genuine smile she'd seen from him in days. Curious about everything. He'd take apart clocks just to see how they worked, then spend hours trying to put them back together. Margaret used to find screws and springs all over the house. Abraham's voice grew warmer as he remembered. He was always building things, forts in the backyard, bridges across the creek with fallen logs, towers out of his dinner blocks that reached from the floor to the kitchen table. When he was 8, he announced he was going to build a house so big it would take a whole day to walk from one end to the other. Sounds like he achieved that dream, in a way. More than achieved it. Abraham's expression grew complicated again. Lysander owns construction companies now. Big ones. He's built office towers, shopping centers, entire residential developments. His name is on buildings in 6 different states. Serena felt her stomach drop. 6 states. This wasn't just success. This was the kind of wealth that made headlines. "The last time I saw him," Abraham continued, his voice growing quiet. "He was 25 and already running his first company. Drove up to the old house in a car that cost more than I'd made in 5 years. He wanted to give me money then, too. Wanted to pay off the mortgage, set me up somewhere nice." "What happened?" Abraham's jaw tightened. "I told him I didn't need his charity. Said I'd rather lose the house than take handouts from my own son." He shook his head bitterly. "Pride, Serena. Stupid, worthless pride. And he just left? Not right away. We argued. Said things we probably shouldn't have said. He accused me of being too stubborn to accept help when I needed it. I accused him of trying to buy his way out of guilt for abandoning me." Abraham's voice was barely a whisper now. "The last thing he said to me was, 'I'm trying to be the son you raised me to be.' And I said, then maybe I raised you wrong." Serena felt tears sting her eyes. "Abraham, you didn't mean that. Doesn't matter if I meant it. I said it. Saw it hit him like a physical blow. He got in that fancy car and drove away, and I haven't seen him since." The weight of his regret was so heavy Serena could feel it pressing down on both of them. No wonder Abraham felt he couldn't reach out. No wonder he'd never cash those checks. "But he keeps writing," she pointed out gently. "He keeps sending money. That has to mean something. It means he's a better man than his father." Abraham stared across the water. "It means despite everything I did wrong, he turned out decent anyway." At exactly 2 o'clock that afternoon, Serena pushed open the door of the Riverside Cafe, her heart hammering so hard she was sure everyone could hear it. The cafe was nearly empty. Just old Mr. Johnson reading his newspaper by the window, and a young mother trying to convince her toddler to eat his sandwich. And there, at a corner table with his back to the wall, sat a man who could only be Lysander Fenwick. He was tall and broad-shouldered, wearing a suit that probably cost more than Serena's monthly expenses. His dark hair was streaked with early silver at the temples, and when he looked up at her entrance, she saw Abraham's eyes in a younger, more confident face. Their gazes met across the room, and something passed between them. Recognition without introduction, understanding without words. This was the son Abraham had described, grown into a man who carried himself with quiet authority. Lysander stood as she approached, and Serena was struck by the courtesy of the gesture. Despite his obvious wealth and success, there was no arrogance in his manner. No sense that he thought himself better than the simple cafe or the woman in the patched dress walking toward him. Mrs. Moraga? His voice was deep and gentle, with just a hint of the uncertainty that ran in the Fenwick men. Serena, please. She accepted the chair he held for her, acutely aware of the contrast between his expensive clothes and her simple cotton dress. Thank you for coming. I wasn't sure you would. I almost didn't. Serena folded her hands on the table, studying his face for signs of the boy Abraham had described. How do you know about me? Lysander had the grace to look slightly embarrassed. I hired someone to check on my father. Make sure he was safe, healthy. The investigator mentioned that he'd made friends in town, particularly with a woman who brought him food every morning. You've been watching us. Watching him. You were just there. Lysander paused, seeming to choose his words carefully. But I'm glad you were. The investigator said my father looks happier than he has in years. That's because of you. Do you believe lost relationships can be healed? Type yes if you do. And if this is resonating, be sure to subscribe. Serena felt heat rise in her cheeks. I just brought him breakfast sometimes. Anyone would have done the same. No, Lysander said firmly. Anyone wouldn't have. Most people would have walked past an old man on a bench without a second thought. You stopped. You cared. You kept coming back. His voice grew softer. You gave him something I couldn't hope. Before he left, Lysander asked, what if I told her what you couldn't? The fever hit Leora like a freight train at 3 in the morning. Serena woke to the sound of violent coughing coming from her daughter's small bed, and when she rushed over, Leora's skin was burning hot to the touch. Mama, Leora whispered, her voice weak and raspy. I can't breathe right. Panic shot through Serena's chest. The nearest doctor was 20 miles away, and she had no car, no phone, no way to get help quickly. Her hands shook as she felt Leora's forehead. The fever was dangerously high and climbing. She wrapped Leora in blankets and ran outside into the cold night, not caring that she was still in her nightgown and bare feet. Abraham's small apartment was only 3 houses away, and she pounded on his door with desperate fists. Abraham, please, I need help. The door opened within seconds, revealing Abraham in his old robe, his hair disheveled from sleep. One look at Serena's tear-streaked face and the bundle in her arms told him everything he needed to know. Bring her inside, he said immediately, stepping aside. Put her on my bed. Abraham's small room was sparse but clean, with a narrow bed and a single chair by the window. Serena laid Leora down gently, her daughter's breathing shallow and labored. What do we do? Serena asked, her voice breaking with fear. She's burning up, and I don't have money for a doctor, and... Breathe, Abraham said firmly, placing steady hands on Serena's shoulders. I helped Margaret through countless fevers when Lysander was small. We can do this. For the next 4 hours, they worked together like a team that had been practicing for years. Abraham brewed medicinal tea from herbs he kept in old coffee cans, while Serena bathed Leora's forehead with cool cloths. They took turns reading to the little girl when she was awake and held her hands when she drifted in and out of feverish sleep. Tell me about when Lysander was sick, Serena said quietly as dawn began to creep through the window. They were both exhausted, but Leora's breathing had finally started to ease. Abraham smiled softly, stroking the sleeping child's hair. He was about her age when he caught pneumonia. Scared us half to death. Margaret and I took shifts just like this, never leaving his side for 3 days straight. You were a good father then, Serena said, her voice thick with emotion. I try to be, for a while, anyway. Abraham looked at Serena, noting the dark circles under her eyes, the way her hair had come loose from its braid during their long vigil. Even exhausted and worried sick, she was beautiful. More than that, she was strong in ways that had nothing to do with physical strength. As the fever finally broke and Leora slept peacefully, Serena felt herself beginning to collapse with relief and exhaustion. Abraham caught her before she could fall, pulling her gently against his chest. She's going to be fine, he murmured in her hair. Serena closed her eyes and let herself be held, feeling safer than she had since her husband died. Abraham's arms were steady and warm, and for the first time in years, she didn't feel like she had to carry the weight of the world alone. Thank you, she whispered against his shoulder. I don't know what I would have done without you. Abraham tilted her chin up so she had to meet his eyes. You never have to find out. I'm not going anywhere, Serena. The promise in his voice made her heart skip. There was something different in his eyes now. Not just kindness, but something deeper, warmer, more dangerous to her carefully guarded heart. Abraham, she started to say, but he placed a gentle finger against her lips. I know you're scared, he said softly. I'm scared too, but I haven't felt this alive since Margaret died, and that's because of you. They stood there in the growing morning light, Serena's hands resting against Abraham's chest, his arms encircling her waist. Neither of them moved to break the moment, even though they both knew they were standing at the edge of something that would change everything. What are you thinking? Abraham asked, his voice barely above a whisper. Serena looked at this man who had dropped everything to help her, who had stayed up all night to save her daughter, who looked at her like she was precious and worth protecting. I'm thinking I haven't felt this safe in a very long time. Abraham leaned down slowly, giving her time to pull away if she wanted to. But Serena didn't pull away. Instead, she rose up on her toes to meet him halfway. And when their lips finally touched, it was gentle and tentative and full of all the hope they both thought they'd lost forever. When they finally broke apart, both of them were breathing hard, and Abraham rested his forehead against hers. I love you, Serena, he said simply. I know it's too soon to say it, and I know you probably think I'm too old or too broken or... I love you too, she interrupted, her voice shaking with the admission. And you're not too anything. You're exactly who I needed, even if I didn't know I was looking. As dawn broke fully over Willow Creek, Serena tucked herself against Abraham's side while they watched Leora sleep. For the first time since her husband's death, she allowed herself to imagine a future that wasn't just about survival. A future that included love and laughter and someone to share the burden of raising her daughter. What she didn't know was that Lysander was awake too, sitting in his hotel room across town, staring at his phone and trying to find the courage to call his father. He'd driven past Abraham's apartment 3 times during the night, wanting to knock on the door, but afraid of what kind of reception he'd get. And that morning, he made a decision that would change everything. That night, Serena opened her door, and Lysander was still there waiting. Lysander stood on Serena's front porch at 8 in the evening, still wearing his expensive suit, but looking more nervous than any billionaire had a right to look. His hands were shoved deep in his pockets, and he kept glancing toward Abraham's apartment 3 houses down the street. I need to tell you something, he said without preamble when Serena opened the door. About my father, about me, about why I can't just knock on his door and fix 7 years of silence with an apology. Serena stepped aside to let him in, her heart pounding with anticipation and dread. Leora was already asleep, recovered from her fever, but exhausted from the ordeal. The small living room felt even smaller with Lysander's tall frame filling the space. Would you like some tea? Serena asked, needing something to do with her hands. Please. Lysander sat carefully on her worn couch, looking around the modest room with genuine interest rather than judgment. His eyes lingered on Leora's drawings taped to the walls, on the hand-sewn curtains, on the fresh flowers Abraham had picked for Serena just that morning. "He loves you," Lysander said quietly as Serena handed him a steaming mug. The directness of the statement made Serena blush. "What makes you say that?" "Because I've been watching him for 3 days, and every time he looks at you, his whole face changes. He looks peaceful, happy. I haven't seen him look like that since my mother was alive." Serena settled into the chair across from him, wrapping her hands around her own mug for warmth. "Tell me about her. About what really happened to your family." Lysander was quiet for a long moment, staring into his tea like it held answers to questions he'd been avoiding for years. Finally, he began to speak. "My mother was the glue that held us together. She could make my father laugh when he was stressed about work, make me feel brave when I was scared of the dark, make our house feel like the center of the universe." His voice grew soft with memory. "When she got sick, everything started falling apart piece by piece." "How old were you?" 12 when she died. Old enough to understand what was happening, but too young to know how to help. Lysander set down his mug and leaned forward, his hands clasped between his knees. "My father went into this dark place after we lost her. He'd sit in her chair for hours, just staring out the window. He stopped eating meals with me, stopped helping with homework, stopped being present." Serena felt tears prick her eyes, imagining a young boy trying to navigate grief while watching his father disappear before his eyes. "I try to be strong," Lysander continued. "Try to take care of both of us. But I was just a kid and I was angry. Angry that she left us. Angry that he wasn't fighting harder to keep our family together. Angry that I had to grow up so fast. What happened then? I started acting out, getting in trouble at school, staying out late, talking back to him when he tried to set rules. We'd have these terrible fights where we'd both say things we didn't mean." Lysander's voice grew heavy with regret. "The worse I behaved, the more he pulled away. The more he pulled away, the worse I behaved. It was a vicious cycle. So he sent you to boarding school. I think he thought it was the right thing to do. Give me structure, discipline, opportunities he couldn't provide while he was grieving." Lysander shook his head, but it felt like abandonment, like he was giving up on us. Serena could see the pain that 12-year-old boy still carried, even in this successful man's face. "Did you ever tell him how you felt?" "I tried when I got older. When I came back from college and started my first business, I wanted to make things right. I had money by then, enough to help him, to maybe rebuild what we'd lost." Lysander's jaw tightened with remembered frustration. But he was so damn proud, so convinced that accepting my help would somehow diminish him. "That last fight you had was my fault as much as his." I accused him of wallowing in self-pity instead of moving forward. He accused me of thinking money could fix everything. Lysander stood and walked to the window, looking out toward Abraham's apartment. I told him I was trying to be the son he raised me to be, and he said maybe he raised me wrong. It felt like he was rejecting not just my help, but me. The pain in his voice was so raw that Serena had to resist the urge to go to him, to offer comfort to this man she barely knew but was beginning to understand. "So you both gave up," she said gently. "I told myself I was respecting his wishes. He'd made it clear he didn't want me in his life, so I stayed away. But I kept writing letters, kept sending money, kept hoping that someday he'd reach out." Lysander turned back to her. "And then I heard about you." "What about me?" "That there was someone taking care of him. Someone who made him smile again, who made him want to get up in the morning. I was so grateful I could barely breathe." Lysander's eyes were bright with unshed tears. "And then I saw you together, and I realized something else." "What?" "That you love him too. And that scares me, because I don't want him to have to choose between his son and the woman who saved him from loneliness." Serena set down her tea and stood, crossing to where Lysander stood by the window. "He talks about you constantly, about how proud he is of what you've built, how much he regrets the things he said, how afraid he is that you'll never forgive him. He said that every single day." Serena placed a gentle hand on Lysander's arm. "He loves you, Lysander. He's just too proud and too scared to make the first move. Just like you are." Lysander looked down at her hand on his arm, then up at her face. For a moment, something passed between them. Not romantic, but an understanding, a recognition of shared purpose. "Will you help me?" he asked quietly. "Will you help me find a way back to him?" Before Serena could answer, there was a knock at the door. They both froze, looking at each other with wide eyes. "Serena?" Abraham's voice called softly from a porch. "I saw lights on. Is everything all right?" Lysander stepped forward, then stopped. Something told him this woman meant more than she knew. The knock came again, more insistent this time. Serena looked at Lysander with panic in her eyes, her mind racing with the implications of Abraham finding his son in her living room without warning or explanation. "The back door," she whispered urgently, but Lysander shook his head. "No more running away," he said quietly, his voice steady despite the tremor in his hands. "No more missed chances." Before Serena could protest, Lysander walked to the front door and opened it himself. Abraham stood on the porch holding a small bouquet of wildflowers, the same flowers he'd been bringing Serena every few days since Leora's recovery. His mouth fell open when he saw the tall figure filling the doorway, and the flowers slipped from his nerveless fingers to scatter across the wooden boards. "Hello, Dad," Lysander said softly. For a moment that stretched like eternity, father and son stared at each other across 7 years of silence and regret. Abraham's eyes traced his son's face, noting the silver at his temples, the lines around his eyes, the expensive cut of his clothes. Lysander saw his father's frailty, the way his shoulders had begun to stoop, the tremor in his hands that spoke of age and hardship. "Lysander," Abraham's voice was barely a whisper. "What are you doing here?" "I came to see you, to thank the woman who's been taking care of you when I couldn't." Lysander stepped aside, gesturing toward Serena, who stood frozen in the middle of her small living room. "To try to fix what I broke 7 years ago." Abraham's legs seemed to give out, and he sank heavily onto Serena's porch steps. Lysander immediately moved to steady him, their hands touching for the first time in years. "I don't understand," Abraham said, looking between his son and Serena. "How do you know each other? How long have you been here?" 3 days, Lysander admitted, settling beside his father on the steps. "I hired someone to check on you, make sure you were safe. When I learned about Serena, about how she'd been caring for you, I had to come see for myself." Abraham's face cycled through confusion, hurt, and finally anger. "You've been spying on me? I've been worried about you," Lysander shot back, then immediately gentled his tone. "Dad, you haven't cashed a single check I've sent. You haven't returned my calls or answered my letters. I didn't know if you were sick or hurt, or if you even wanted to hear from me anymore." "Of course I wanted to hear from you." The words burst out of Abraham like a dam breaking. "Every single day, for 7 years, I wanted to pick up that phone and call you. But after what I said, after how I failed you when you needed me most." "You didn't fail me," Lysander interrupted. "We both made mistakes. We both let pride get in the way of what mattered." Serena watched from the doorway, tears streaming down her face as she witnessed the reunion she'd been praying for since she first heard Abraham speak his son's name. These two stubborn, loving men had spent years punishing themselves for words spoken in grief and anger. "I'm sorry," Abraham said, his voice breaking. "I'm so sorry, son. I should have been stronger after your mother died. Should have held us together instead of falling apart. And I should have understood that you were grieving too," Lysander replied. "Should have given you time to heal instead of demanding you be everything I needed right away." They sat in silence for a moment, the weight of 7 years of separation settling between them like dust after a storm. Finally, Abraham looked up at Serena. "How long have you known who he was?" Serena wiped her eyes and moved to sit on the steps below them. "I suspected when he wrote to me. Confirmed it when we met for coffee yesterday." "Coffee?" Abraham looked hurt. "You met without telling me." "I wanted to understand," Serena said gently. "I wanted to know if his intentions toward you were genuine, or if he was just trying to ease his guilt." "And what did you decide?" Serena looked at Lysander, then back at Abraham. "I decided that you're both too proud and too scared to take the first step, but you love each other more than you hate your own stubbornness." Abraham laughed, a sound rusty with disuse, but genuine. "She's got us figured out," doesn't she? Completely, Lysander agreed, and for the first time since his arrival, he smiled. It transformed his entire face, making him look younger and more like the boy Abraham remembered. There's something else we need to talk about, Lysander said carefully. About Serena, about what she means to you. Abraham's face flushed, and he glanced at Serena with an expression that was part love, part apology. I don't know what you've heard, but I've heard that she makes you happy, Lysander interrupted. I've seen the way you look at her, and more importantly, I've seen the way she looks at you. He turned to Serena. You love him. It wasn't a question, and Serena didn't treat it like one. Yes, I do. And you love her, Lysander said to his father. Abraham nodded slowly. More than I thought I could love anyone again. Then that's all that matters. Lysander stood and brushed off his expensive pants. Dad, I have a proposition for you. Both of you, actually. What kind of proposition? Abraham asked suspiciously. Lysander grinned, and suddenly he looked exactly like the boy who had once dreamed of building bridges that would last forever. How would you feel about letting me build you a house? A real house, with room for a family. Room for all of us. Abraham started to shake his head, the old pride rising up again, but Serena placed a gentle hand on his arm. Listen to him, she said quietly. Let him explain before you say no. Would you keep visiting a stranger like Serena did? Share your thoughts. And please hit the like button if this story is touching your heart. Not charity, Lysander said quickly, reading his father's expression. Partnership. I need someone I trust to oversee my construction projects in this area. Someone who understands quality, who can make sure the work gets done right. The salary would be more than enough to afford a nice house, and the position would come with respect and purpose. Abraham stared at his son with wonder. You trust me with that kind of responsibility? Dad, you taught me everything I know about building things that last. Who else would I trust? That night, Serena opened her door, and Lysander was still there waiting. Spring arrived in Willow Creek, like a promise kept. The last of the winter snow melted into rushing streams that fed the river. Wildflowers painted the meadows in brilliant splashes of color, and the air carried the sweet scent of new beginnings. Serena stood in her garden, watching Lysander and Abraham work together on the framework of what would soon be a greenhouse. Their partnership had grown over the past month from tentative politeness to easy collaboration, and seeing them side by side, father and son united in purpose, made her heart swell with contentment. Hand me that level, Abraham called out, and Lysander immediately passed him the tool without being told which one his father needed. They developed an almost telepathic understanding when it came to building things, as if the 7 years apart had never happened. Mama, look, Leora called from where she was arranging stones in careful patterns around the greenhouse foundation. She'd appointed herself the official decorator of the project, and both men treated her suggestions with the seriousness of a master architect. It's beautiful, sweetheart, Serena said, admiring the intricate design her daughter had created. The greenhouse had been Lysander's idea, but it was Abraham who had insisted on building it by hand rather than hiring contractors. Some things are too important to trust to strangers, he'd said, and Lysander had agreed without hesitation. Besides, Abraham had added with a sly smile, I need to make sure this thing is sturdy enough to withstand my future daughter-in-law's enthusiasm for gardening. The casual mention of marriage had made Serena blush furiously, but neither Abraham nor Lysander seemed to think there was anything presumptuous about the assumption. Their relationship had deepened naturally over the weeks, moving from friendship to love to an unspoken understanding that they were building something permanent together. The frame's ready for the glass panels, Lysander announced, stepping back to admire their work. He'd traded his expensive suits for work clothes, and there was something different about him now. More relaxed, more genuine, more like the man he was meant to be rather than the man success had made him. Tomorrow we'll install them, Abraham said, wiping sweat from his forehead with a clean handkerchief. At 68, he moved more slowly than he once had, but purpose had restored strength to his movements and light to his eyes. Actually, Lysander said, glancing meaningfully at Serena, I was thinking we might wait until Saturday for that part. "Why Saturday?" Abraham asked, following his son's gaze. Lysander walked over to Serena and took her hands in his expression suddenly serious. "Because I was hoping Saturday might be a special day for all of us." Serena's heart began to race. "Lysander, what are you?" "I know this might seem presumptuous," he said quickly, "and I know we haven't known each other very long, but these past few weeks have shown me something important." Abraham moved closer, sensing the significance of the moment. Even Leora stopped arranging stones and looked up with curious eyes. "What have they shown you?" Serena asked softly. "That love isn't about time or circumstances or what makes sense on paper. It's about finding someone who makes you want to be better than you are, someone who sees the best in you even when you can't see it yourself." Lysander's voice grew stronger with each word. "You saved my father from loneliness, but you did more than that. You showed him how to hope again, how to trust again, how to open his heart after he thought it was permanently closed." Tears began to stream down Serena's face as she understood where this was leading. "And you gave me back my father," Lysander continued. "But more than that, you showed me what real strength looks like, what grace under pressure looks like, what means to love someone not for what they can give you, but for who they are." Abraham stepped forward and placed his hands on both their shoulders. "Son, what are you trying to say?" Lysander smiled and dropped to one knee right there in the garden, pulling a simple but elegant ring from his pocket. Serena gasped, her free hand flying to her mouth. "Serena Moraga," Lysander said, his voice steady despite the emotion in his eyes. "Will you marry me? Will you let me spend the rest of my life trying to be worthy of the love you've already given so freely?" The garden fell completely silent except for the sound of birds singing in the nearby trees and the distant gurgle of the river. Serena looked down at this man who had swept into her quiet life like a whirlwind of possibility, then at Abraham, whose face was glowing with joy and approval. "What about your father?" she asked quietly. "What about us?" Abraham laughed and stepped forward to envelop both of them in a hug. "My dear girl, there is no us without you anymore. You're not taking my son away from me, but giving me the daughter I never had. And I'm not asking you to choose between your old life and a new one," Lysander added. "I'm asking if we can build something together, all of us. A family that's big enough for everyone we love." Serena looked around the garden, at the greenhouse they'd built together, at Leora's delighted face, at Abraham's proud smile, at the home they'd already begun creating without her even realizing it. "Yes," she whispered, then louder, "Yes, of course, yes." Lysander slipped the ring onto her finger and stood to kiss her, while Abraham and Leora cheered and applauded. When they finally broke apart, all four of them were crying and laughing at the same time. "Saturday, it is then," Abraham said, wiping his eyes with the back of his hand. "We'll finish the greenhouse as a wedding present." "Speaking of wedding presents," Lysander said with a grin, "I have one more surprise." He led them around to the front of the cottage, where a large wrapped object sat on the porch. Abraham and Serena exchanged curious glances as Lysander pulled away the covering to reveal a beautiful wooden sign painted in elegant script, "The Fenwick Family." "For our new house," he explained. "The one we're going to build together as a family." Serena looked at the sign, then at the three people who had somehow become her whole world in the space of a few short months. A year ago, she had been a struggling single mother with no prospects beyond survival. Now she was engaged to a man who loved her, surrounded by a family that chose her, looking forward to a future bright with possibility. "I think," she said softly, "this is going to be the most beautiful spring Willow Creek has ever seen." And for the first time in years, Serena whispered the words, "I think I'm falling in love." 6 months later, golden autumn light filtered through the completed greenhouse windows as Serena tended to herbs that grew more lush and green than any she'd ever cultivated. The glass walls Abraham and Lysander had installed with such care created a perfect sanctuary where life could flourish even when the world outside grew cold. Dinner's almost ready. Abraham called from the kitchen of their new home, a modest but beautiful house that Lysander had designed and all four of them had helped build. It sat on a gentle hill overlooking the river, with wide windows that captured every sunrise and sunset. Serena smiled and gathered fresh basil for the pasta sauce, marveling at how completely her life had changed. The scared, struggling woman who had once counted every penny now moved through her days with confidence and joy, supported by a family that had chosen each other through love rather than obligation. "Mama, come see," Leora called from the living room, where she was curled up in Abraham's lap, both of them reading from a book of fairy tales. At 8 years old, she had blossomed under the attention of two devoted father figures, growing braver and more confident with each passing day. "What are you reading about, sweetheart?" Serena asked, settling into the comfortable chair beside them. "Grandpa Abraham is telling me about the bridge builders," Leora said seriously. "The ones who make connections that last forever." Abraham winked at Serena over Leora's head. Since the wedding, she had insisted on calling him Grandpa, and he had embraced the title with fierce pride. "I was explaining how some people are natural bridge builders. They bring together things that belong together but got separated somehow. Like how you brought Papa Lysander back to Grandpa Abraham," Leora asked with the straightforward logic of childhood. "Exactly like that," Abraham confirmed, his voice warm with love and gratitude. Lysander appeared in the doorway, still wearing the work clothes he preferred to his old business suits. He'd restructured his company to allow him to work from home most days, making trips to the city only when absolutely necessary. Success, he discovered, meant nothing without people to share it with. "How are my 3 favorite people?" he asked, crossing to kiss Serena's forehead and ruffle Leora's hair. "Perfect," Serena said simply, and meant it. They gathered around the dining room table, a solid oak piece that Abraham had crafted himself as a wedding gift. The meal was simple: pasta with fresh vegetables from the garden, warm bread, and wine that Lysander had been saving for a special occasion. "What makes tonight special?" Serena asked as he uncorked the bottle. "Every night is special now," he replied, pouring glasses for the adults and grape juice for Leora. "But tonight I wanted to make a toast." They raised their glasses, even Leora holding her juice cup high. "To second chances," Lysander began, his voice thick with emotion. "To pride swallowed and love chosen over fear. To a woman brave enough to feed strangers and strong enough to heal broken hearts." He looked at each of them in turn. "To family, not the one we were born into, but the one we built together. To bridge builders," Abraham added, smiling at Leora, who giggled with delight. "To love," Serena said softly, in all its unexpected forms. They drank and laughed and told stories late into the evening. Abraham shared memories of Margaret that no longer brought pain but celebration. Lysander talked about the construction projects he was planning, not just for profit, but for the joy of creating something lasting and beautiful. Serena described her dreams for expanding the greenhouse, maybe even starting a small business selling herbs and vegetables to the community. As the evening wound down and Leora began to yawn, Serena felt a profound sense of contentment settle over her like a warm blanket. This was what she had been searching for without knowing it. Not just security or companionship, but a place where she belonged completely and unconditionally. Later, as they tucked Leora into bed in her new room with its yellow walls and hand-painted flower borders, the little girl looked up at all 3 of them seriously. "Are you happy now, Mama?" she asked. "Really happy?" Serena sat on the edge of the bed and smoothed her daughter's hair. "Happier than I ever thought possible, baby girl." "Good," Leora said with satisfaction, "because Grandpa Abraham told me that when people love each other the right way, it makes the whole world a little bit better." "He's right about that," Lysander said from the doorway. "I usually am," Abraham added with mock seriousness, making Leora giggle. After Leora fell asleep, the 3 adults sat on the front porch, watching the moon reflect off the river and listening to the gentle sounds of the night. Serena was nestled between Abraham and Lysander on the porch swing Abraham had built, feeling surrounded by love and protection. "I have a confession," Abraham said suddenly. "I used to think my life was over when Margaret died." Thought the best parts of me died with her, and all I had left was existing until it was my turn to go. What changed? Lysander asked gently. Abraham looked at Serena with eyes that held all the tenderness in the world. This beautiful woman showed me that love doesn't have limits, that hearts can heal and grow and love again without diminishing what came before. He took her hand and squeezed it. She gave me back my son and my future, and I didn't even know I was missing them. You both saved me too, Serena said, her voice thick with tears. I was so focused on just surviving, on getting through each day, that I forgot there could be joy in living. You reminded me that I deserve happiness, that Leora deserves to see her mother thriving, not just enduring. And you both taught me what really matters, Lysander added. I spent so many years chasing success, thinking that if I built enough or earned enough, I'd finally feel worthy of the love I lost. But love isn't something you earn. It's something you choose to give and receive. They sat in comfortable silence, each lost in their own thoughts about the journey that had brought them together. Finally, Serena spoke. What do you think Margaret would say if she could see us now? Abraham considered the question seriously. I think she'd say we did good. I think she'd be proud that we figured out how to love again, how to be a family again. And I think she'd love you for bringing us back to life. As the evening grew later and cooler, they prepared to go inside. But Serena paused at the door, looking back at the greenhouse glowing softly in the moonlight, at the garden they'd planted together, at the life they'd built from nothing but hope and determination. You know what I realized today? She said. What's that? Lysander asked, wrapping his arms around her from behind. I used to think that having enough meant having security, enough food, enough money, enough safety. But I was wrong. She leaned back against his chest, feeling Abraham's hand squeeze her shoulder. Having enough means having enough love to go around, enough joy to share, enough hope to keep building, even when you can't see the end result. Abraham nodded sagely. The richest lives aren't lived in big houses or expensive cars. They're lived in love, love given freely, love received gratefully, love that builds bridges between hearts that thought they were too broken to connect. As they finally headed inside, Serena took one last look at the stars scattered across the clear night sky. Somewhere up there, she thought, Margaret was smiling down on the family that had grown from the seeds of her own love story. And in that quiet cottage at the edge of Willow Creek, they had discovered that the richest lives are lived in love. If this story touched your heart and reminded you that love can bloom in the most unexpected places, please give it a thumbs up and share your favorite moment in the comments below. Your stories of unexpected kindness and second chances inspire others to keep hope alive. Don't forget to subscribe and turn on notifications so you won't miss more heartwarming love stories like this one. Because next week, we're bringing you another incredible tale of love, hope, and unexpected miracles that will leave you believing in the power of human connection all over again.